welcome to another English Sparkling with Tweedy video. Today, the last for now in a run of wines from Breaky Bottom. And I've been saving the best till last of this little mini series. This is one of Breaky Bottom's most lauded wines, I think. It is the 2010 Cuve Koizumi Yakumo. This is an entirely Seyval Blanc wine, and this I think is probably the exemplar for any other producer making Seyval Blanc wines to follow. I think I covered Seyval Blanc a little bit in a previous video. I'll put a link to that up there. It's a grape that is a hybrid used perhaps somewhat more in the earlier days of English wine production, but it has still lingered on here at Breaky Bottom and still used by a few other places. Not always, as I said in the previous video, my favourite grape, but I think what Peter Hall, the winemaker and owner at Breaky Bottom, does with it can be spectacular, and I think this generally is regarded as the best example. So 2010 vintage. As I'm recording this, it is late September 2024, so these grapes came off the vines 14 years ago. I forget the exact period of Lee's aging, but it was pretty long. Perhaps I'll put that on the screen if I can figure that out. This is now in pretty short supply, and I think quite reasonably the prices of it, you can still buy it directly from Breaky Bottom via their website. The prices of it have elevated accordingly. So this is a relatively pricey bottle of English sparkling. It's in the 60 to 70 pounds range. Pretty expensive by English sparkling standards, but I think it is something really quite special. You may have noticed if you've been watching any of these videos about Breaky Bottom, Peter always names his wines after a person. Each cuvee has the name of a person, and they're usually, sorry, it's a plane going overhead. It's been really bad recently for that. They're usually either a friend of Peter's or, in this case, actually a relative. Koizumi Yakumo, who is a very famous literary figure who helped to sort of join the worlds of Western and Japanese literature. Originally of Greek-Irish extraction, I think, born in Greece to a Greek and English-Irish parents. And he moved and spent much of his life in Japan, helped to introduce Western literature to Japan, and then helped the West to learn about Japanese literature in return. So a big figure in Japan. Koizumi Yakumo is a sort of an assumed name. I think his original born name was Lafcidio Hearn. He is the great uncle of Peter Hall, the owner slash winemaker at Breaky Bottom. That was a long bit of blurb, but I think this wine deserves a bit of build up. It is, I hope it still is. It's a while since I last had this, but it always has been something really quite special. Apologies as ever for the subpar stemware, but it has a pale gold, slightly greenish colour, and just look how lively the fizz is on that still. This is 14 years old, remember, and once again, significant amount of period on the leaves, which I don't remember. And on the nose, I'm getting this deep citrus character, really condensed and considered about that citrus character. It's not just a bit of fresh, simple lemon juice. Sort of layers of complexity to that citrus there. And then wrapped around that there is a kind of brioche character. It's still quite a freshly baked. Everything about this is kind of wonderfully fresh, actually. Lovely sort of waft of a country kitchen that has some baking going on. And then this quite intense now citrus aroma. And there's possibly some other fruit in with that as well. Some kind of berry fruit maybe. And that citrus character might go a little bit beyond pure lemon. I almost feel like I get a bit of lemongrass there. There's a slightly exotic twinge to this. Maybe a bit of lime. It is still fantastically crisp, zingy, really fresh. A lot of mineral character there. Very long finish. Really sort of mouth coating. I feel like all the parts of my my palate are enjoying that in subtly different ways. So that fruit profile on the palate there, I would say, yeah, mostly lemon. I once heard this described by John Mobbs, a great English wine writer, runs a site called Great British Wine. He described this as, had a sort of lemon curd quality. I love that tasting note because there is something about this that is kind of condensed. That's partly perhaps a result of aging. It is pretty dry, and lemon curd sort of alludes to a little bit more of a hint of sweetness. And I think he perhaps wrote that tasting note a few years ago. There are very subtle hints of sweetness here, but generally speaking, this is all about the zing. It's a very dry style. I don't think Peter actually publishes the dosage levels he uses in his wine, but I think as a backhand remark once when I was visiting there, he said it's usually about 8 grams a litre. It's typically in that sort of ballpark, I think. but don't quote me on that. Once again, as I was perhaps saying with the previous wine, and it's not to sort of put Seyval Blanc down, that the only way that it can achieve anything great is to emulate Chardonnay, but if you handed this to me and I'd never had it before and I was told it was a Blanc to Blanc, it was purely Chardonnay, then I probably would believe you. Some of the way the fruit character here manifests is sort of similar to the way a Chardonnay would. There's a lot going on here, and difficult to know what is the grape versus what is the winemaking process, but it has these layers of complexity and really appealing bitterness. Might get that from a Chardonnay, I don't know. I suppose it's slightly reminiscent of some of Dermot Screw's wines, the Trouble with Dreams series. You sometimes get that kind of bitter lemon complexity, but that's definitely present here. There are these sort of exotic twinges to it, and something less common perhaps with Chardonnay. I always think Seyval Blanc has this kind of slightly grassy, herbaceous note. When elevated, that starts to turn into, combined with that citrus character, something like lemongrass. I do think I get a hint of something like lemongrass here. Now, this would probably be a great pairing for Thai food, for example, and a lot of mineral character, and those really appealing bitter notes, and they linger on the palate for a long time. I think this is something Jancis Robinson commented on in her review, said that a lot of it is to be enjoyed on the finish, and you can continue to appreciate many of those nuances, the zing, the minerality, the bitter notes, some of the autolytic complexity even, continue to sort of dance on your tongue for some time afterwards. Citrusy, complex, exotic hints. I don't recall now exactly when I first had this wine, but I think it was quite possibly in the very early days when I was getting to know Breaky Bottom, which is around about 2018. I'm relatively new to the party. There are aficionados of Breaky Bottom who've been drinking this stuff for literally decades. I think it was probably 2018, the summer of 2018, when I first had anything from Breaky Bottom. And I think this had already been released by then. It's been interesting over those years. I perhaps had Koizumi Yakumo roughly once a year since then, and it's been interesting to see the progression of it. What I love about, again, difficult to know whether this is the grape or just some special quality of Peter's viticulture and Peter's winemaking, but the wines really develop very interestingly, but they never really lose any of their very appealing characteristics. So it started off being a really zingy, really bright, really fresh wine. As it got older, I would say it's really kept all of that acidity, it's kept that sense of freshness. A little bit of the sweetness around the edges has possibly dropped away, but what it definitely hasn't lost is that, that sense of freshness, the fruit expression, and it's gained some of these nice bitter complex notes. It's wonderful that it gets better without sort of losing any of the things that you might have really enjoyed about it in its youth. Still zingy, still fresh, still fruity, but it's bitter, it's exotic, and that finish is really fantastic. The nose here is developing in some interesting ways. I'm getting notes of honey and all honeysuckle now that I don't think I noticed initially. I almost wonder if that's an extension of the autolytic character that somehow seems to go hand in hand with that kind of brioche, bready sort of note. Bread and honey. It's very appealing. I like that. Perhaps I am starting to note some slightly sweeter edges now that perhaps I didn't initially. My palate is probably acclimatizing to the level of zing. Really interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely getting more sweet notes to this now on second glass. That great John Mobbs descriptive of lemon curd is really starting to make more sense now. And it's all of these things at once. It is still really dry, really zingy, really bitter and complex, but then now and again you get this little peak of honey, lemon curd, something like that, in amongst everything else that's going on. I'm really enjoying that. Again, I think this is an exemplar. This is the gold standard, I think, for Seyval Blanc. It's an obscure grape, let's face it. It's something that's only really used in England, and even then, nowadays in English sparkling wine, it's pretty much playing second fiddle to the classic champagne grapes, of course. I think it does also get some use in some parts of the US, probably. Is that more for still wines? I'm not sure. Certainly not a hugely famous, well-known grape. But once again, I do think Breaky Bottom has proven you can do something really interesting with it, make a wine that's really, I think this is exceptional, really outstanding. Fantastic stuff. Koizumi Yakumo. Every time I have it, I sort of feel like this may be the last time, but I have certainly enjoyed it every time that I have had it. Is that enough babbling? Hopefully. Jancis Robinson just wrote a short paragraph, and that probably gave you a better sense of the wine than my 10 plus minutes, however long this will have been in the end of babbling. But shut up, Tweedy. Just wanted to say, basically, you can make some really exceptional wine from this grape, Seyval Blanc, which is a little bit unloved at the moment. And I think this is the prime example. Koizumi Yakumo 2010 Breaky Bottom. Cheers.